Hey everyone, congratulations. You have now made it to the last week of classes. I'm sure you guys are a little stressed out with final exams and projects, papers, everything that's due all at the very end of the semester. I know how that goes. So hopefully some of the tips and tricks and hints here today that I'll give you for your final exam will be helpful and maybe help reduce that stress just a little bit at least. Um, so really all that's left for this course is your final exam, and feel free to come to any of my face-to-face classes if you would like to review. I did post that information on the news feed on D2L. Or I don't know if any of you have gone to some of the study sessions that Andrea Ulrich has already held. Hopefully you found them helpful if you did go. I just wanted to walk you through a couple of tips, tricks, and hints for the final exam. I actually took the test myself this weekend. This is a master exam that's being used through all HWE 100 courses. So I actually didn't write the test, so I wanted to make sure I knew what was going to be asked so I could better help you study. And I have a couple suggestions. I would definitely make sure that, in addition to the test itself, that you actually have a printed review guide. I think that'll be really helpful where you write down page numbers and your answers. It may also be helpful to have a couple PowerPoint slideshows open that you need to reference, because I know, like for example, in chapter 2, your book doesn't really talk much about physical activity and, intensity zones for heart rate, when you're working out. And so some of those PowerPoints that are in Module 1. So have that open. I would also have that vitamin and mineral chart handy, especially with chapters 8 and 9 when the test review asks for questions on, what are deficiencies of vitamin A? What are food sources of vitamin D? Have that chart handy. And that's going to be found under Module 3. It's that vitamin and mineral chart. And then what I would do is print it off and go through the review and highlight the answers to those questions. It'll make it much easier as you're taking your test. The bulk of the test is going to cover chapters 1 through 9, but it is comprehensive, so there will be several questions from chapters 10 through 16. There will be quite a few questions on chapters 14 and 15, which covers pregnancy, breastfeeding, and infant childhood nutrition. So make sure again that you look at those review questions and you're able to answer them. I just wanted to take a minute. I've been going through in my face-to-face classes, reviewing for the final exam, and I just wanted to point out a couple things, a couple page numbers, a couple little hints for some of the questions on there. Just to kind of get started, to kick it off. With chapter 2, definitely make sure that when it comes to the physical activity that you're familiar with the different intensity zones. So for example, down here where it says, identify physical activity zone based on maximum heart rate. In order to calculate maximum heart rate, that's 220 minus your age. Moderate intensity activity is considered 50 to 70% of your max heart rate, whereas vigorous intensity activity is considered 70 to 85% your max heart rate. Number 3 under chapter 2 lists the nutritional factors for evaluating nutritional status and identify examples. That's going to be found on page 59 in your textbook, that ABCDE tool for completing a nutrition assessment. So anthropometric measurements, biochemical assessments, a clinical assessment, dietary assessment, and then an environmental assessment. For chapter 3, definitely know the different absorptive processes, which you'll find on page 98. There will be some questions on that. Know which nutrients or how different nutrients are absorbed into the intestinal cell. There's a great chart on the digestive system on page 93. I'm referencing my hard copy, that's why I keep looking down. Page 93 has got a great diagram of the digestive system, so take a look at that. Just to go through a couple other questions, for number 1 under chapter 3, it says list and define secretions of the pancreas. You'll find that answer on page 101. So know both the hormones as well as the enzymes that are secreted by the pancreas. You will have to do a little bit of math, both in chapter 1 and then through chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7. You'll need to be able to do some conversions from pounds to kilograms, calories to grams, grams to calories. You'll also need to know how to calculate BMI and then understand different BMI classifications. So that's all going to be in chapter 7. You will also want to be familiar with the various lipoproteins, and you can find that on page 176. So chylomicrons, very low density lipoproteins, high density lipoproteins. Know the difference between them, what they typically carry, what they're typically composed of. That'll definitely be helpful for you. Just be aware when it comes to fats and needs for different nutrients. I shouldn't say fat, as a and that's just one example, but each nutrient, whether it's a vitamin or a mineral, has a different recommendation. So that could be a recommended dietary allowance, it could be an adequate intake. In the case of the macronutrients, a lot of times they also have acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges. Carbohydrates and protein do have an RDA. So the RDA for carbohydrates is 130 grams per day. For protein, the RDA is 0.8 grams per kilogram. And one of your review questions actually says to state the RDA for protein. And the RDA for protein, it is 0.8 grams per kilogram, but it also equates to about 10 to 15% of your total calories. Now, the acceptable macronutrient distribution range for protein is actually 10 to 35% of your calories. That's considered a healthy range for protein intake. And I know with each of these recommendations, it gets really tricky, especially with fat, because there is no actual RDA for fat. Fat just has the acceptable macronutrient distribution range of 20 to 35% of your total calories. So just be aware of that. Scrolling down here to the specific questions on protein. Oops, I went a little too far. Number 2 under chapter 6 is list the effects of high protein diets. You'll find that on pages 218 through 220. So be able to reference those pages. Also, you'll want to know all of the essential amino acids. So on page 209, there's a great chart where the question on the test is basically going to give you different food combinations, and you're going to have to identify the food combination that contains all of the essential amino acids. And if you look at that chart on page 209, it goes through each of the not all of the food groups, but plant sources of protein, and highlights the limiting amino acids. So if you're trying to consume a meal that contains all of the essential amino acids, you have to be very careful about your selections. So reference that chart on page 209. Again, with vitamins, minerals, and water, have that vitamin and mineral chart handy. It'll be very useful for you when you're taking this test. There's not going to be a ton of questions from chapters 10 through 13, and there's a few questions in chapter 16, but the bulk of the rest of the exam is going to cover chapters 14 and 15. Because I'm a sports dietitian, I'm just going to highlight a couple things with chapter 10. I'm very passionate about this topic. I wish we could spend a little bit more time on it. It says state the primary source of fuel during intense physical activity. That's going to be carbohydrates. During low intensity physical activity, that's typically going to be more fats. Now, at any given time during exercise, you're going to be burning a combination of carbohydrates, fats, and protein, but depending on the intensity and the duration, that's going to play the biggest role in determining what fuel source is going to predominate. Um, when it says state the most appropriate choice of fluid during physical activity based on the duration, usually my guideline is that if you're exercising less than an hour, just stick with water. If you're exercising longer than that, you may need to think about supplemental carbohydrates and electrolytes just to make sure you're staying hydrated. As well as you might even need some carbohydrates and electrolytes to replace those losses. For chapter 12, when it says match the federally subsidized program to the eligible group, you'll want to reference page 483 for that question. With pregnancy and breastfeeding, there are going to be quite a few questions on the test that will cover this topic. And really most of those answers you will find in your textbook. You'll definitely want to reference those vitamins and minerals that are important for pregnant women, those nutrients of concern during pregnancy. That'll be especially important to know. Just going through to make sure I cover everything for you. With chapter 16, nutrition during adulthood, there are just a couple questions. The last question actually on the review and the last question on the task is going to ask about the cocktail effect. And when I was reviewing your exam this weekend, I, for the life of me, could not find the answer to that. I always thought the cocktail effect was mixing prescription drugs and alcohol. But in the case of your exam, let me scroll down to that actual question. In the case of your exam, I'm just basically going to give you that answer, so make sure that you mark it correctly on the test. So what the cocktail effect refers to is actually the total sum of a diet rich in fruits and vegetables, as well as whole grains. And together, that helps produce a preventative effect against disease. So that's the definition of the cocktail effect. I do not believe your book references it. If one of you finds it, will you please tell me where it is so I can reference that definition? As a whole, though, hopefully this little review helps. If you have any specific questions about any of the questions, I would just ask that instead of sending me a message on D2L or via email, that you post it in either the questions for the instructor or questions for your classmates discussion board, because I'm sure if you have a question about one of these questions that's listed on here, one of your classmates does as well. So I'd really like to be able to answer it for all of you. Again, like I said, if you know the review, you should do completely fine on the test. And I've been trying to figure out a way so that y'all can see your actual grade as of right now. But for some reason, a lot of my students are saying it's not showing up. It is a final calculated grade, so basically if you just sum up the total points for the course, and then how many points you have, that'll give you your grade. Or if you're interested in knowing your grade, just shoot me an email. I'd be glad to let you know where you stand in the class right now. But as always, if you have additional questions, please let me know. If you have specific test questions, again, post them in the discussion board. Hopefully that was helpful. It's been a real pleasure teaching you guys this semester. I know with an online class it can be a little tricky, but hopefully you've learned a lot. You've gotten a lot out of it. Nutrition is definitely my passion. I'll be teaching again future semesters here at the community college. If you're more interested in nutrition and exercise, I also teach a sports nutrition class, HWE 237. That'll be available in the fall if you're interested in taking that as well. But as always, let me know if you have any questions, and best of luck on your final exam.